is Lois. So she was born in the Netherlands but relocated every couple of years, spending time in various countries and loved art throughout high school. This is just like an overview of her as a person. I'll get more into other stuff later. But she signed up for the animation course in Ghent and studied there for a year. And she moved to the Netherlands to study animation, where she studied for 4 years and got a master's degree. She went freelance after graduation and started working for various game companies, creating games, art, and promotional illustrations. So, I mean, this is why I also chose her, because not only do I follow her on Instagram and I like her as an artist. So she released her first art book in 2016, The Art of Loish, and then 2 years later released her second art book, The Sketchbook of Loish. And she now gives workshops and lectures, speaks at events, gives live demonstrations to aspiring digital artists alongside working freelance. Um, she has done plenty of work in on like Horizon Zero Dawn and stuff like that, which I will be showing later on. Um, but yeah, so techniques and hardware. So on average, she spends around 10 to 20 hours to make a digital piece. She uses plenty of references like Google and Pinterest, and most of her work is created on her workstation, a Cintiq 27 QHD, an Asus PA32 9Q screen, and a self-assembled PC. And she mainly uses the latest version of Adobe Photoshop, but regularly switches between this and Procreate. So I've put this here so that I can compare my process with her process. Um, yeah. Um, Alongside that, she has those techniques. So she does sketching, which she does a lot. You can see that in a lot of her artwork. A way to improve and practice keeps her creativity flowing. Um, like I mentioned before, she does sketching, but she also cleans those sketches up and uses them as line art. She uses messy line art, going from the messy sketching straight to the painting phase. And the colours she uses are largely intuitive, splashing colours onto the sketch and messing around until it feels right. Using colour controls is also a key factor, so I've made sure I've done that in my own artwork. Um, Blending, so this is something that I was not familiar with before I created this piece in her style. So blending with colours, begin with a messy rough version and blend the colours by sculpting with colour, so adding colour on top of different colours and using soft and hard blending, rather than doing line art and then filling it in and then shading that. She sort of layers up the colours on top of each other to create a more of an illusion of shading and stuff like that. And use a minimum amount of layers to keep the process streamlined. Start with the line layer and then a colour layer, then merge it all together once the colour scheme is settled. Okay, so this is my work now, and I've basically done some sketches. I did 3 pieces in total, two 20-hour pieces and like a couple of sketches and stuff like that. So yeah. So these are the sketches. I really wanted to get like a feel for her style. So I created some basic sketches in her traditional style based on her existing pieces. There isn't really much to talk about this. So it's kind of just, she uses messy sketching a lot. So to imitate her, I created some messy sketches of my own, and yeah, as you can see, as I've said previously, and all the information I've gotten is from her FAQ on her website, so it's all very 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 true and correct. So she uses messy sketching a lot. So to imitate her, I created some messy sketches of my own, and every piece is done in Procreate, and that's a software that she herself says she uses a lot. Um, So I gathered some pieces that she had made for Horizon Zero Dawn by Guerrilla Games, when she worked with them as a freelance artist. And alongside this, I found a reference image on Pinterest, which I wanted to use mainly for like the positioning of the profile and things. Um, yeah. So this piece took about 20 hours. This on the right isn't the finished piece. This is just that's total. Um, so this is the process I used to create my final piece. So I began with rough sketches and drawing the features in the way that she does. And as you can see, like I've really tried around here. I'm not sure if you can see my mouse on the far picture on the far right. I've tried to get the facial features of this person and sort of mix it with this person on to the left of that photo. Um, and I think I've succeeded. But yeah, so I began with rough sketches like she does, adding basic colours until it feels right. You know, a method used by her, like I mentioned earlier, that I hadn't used before. And it's also influenced by the colours a lot. She's using red, orangey tones and um, sort of high saturation on like the face. So I wanted to replicate that, where she's using sort of darker colours on the shirt and things. So then I began sculpting in colour, layering colours on top of each other and on top of the line art, which, like I literally mentioned 2 minutes ago, is completely new concept to me. Like I wanted to make her it as similar to her style as possible, so I really tried with it, and I believe I did well. As you can see in my piece, you have like hard highlights and stuff. Especially that like the hair I think is quite similar, and the shirt is quite similar to how her shirt is drawn in this photo. Obviously it's nowhere near as good, and that isn't the final piece. Yeah, I'm pretty sure. Yeah, but I did try to get the shading and the proportions as correct as I could with that. So this is kind of the finished piece, but not really. So as you can see, like I've tried to add freckles, like she had in her Horizon Zero Dawn piece, and especially around the nose area. The way that the nose and the hair is shaded, where it's got like hard shading and soft shading. It's very very similar to this piece. If you look at the nose particularly as well, it's something I feel like I've replicated well. Um, so then I did something that she always uses in her art, which says on her website that she used color controls like hue, brightness, saturation, and levels to create this finished piece. Um, I play with the levels a lot, like I just said, and I added a coloured background with some texture, which is evidenced in many of her sketches, and I even believe like there's some in this one. Yeah, so if you look just behind this person here, just behind her, like a shadow behind her is like a textured build up. Um, so I changed the colours to be more red and more saturated because that's what I wanted. I added um, some freckles and some harder highlights here, especially around the nose and on the chin and on the cheeks, and especially on the shirt, because I looked at the piece and didn't think that it had enough of those hard highlights, because these ones have really like high contrast highlights, and I was struggling to get that sort of finish on my work, because when I do it looked wrong in my brain and it didn't feel right. But I tried to just go out my comfort zone and really get in there. And I added my signature at the bottom, which is something that I never do and I probably should do. But in most of her pieces, like even the one nearest to the text at the bottom, there's a signature there, and even in like these ones, she puts her signature everywhere that she can. Um, but yeah, so this is the finished piece I've got. I tried to use all of her tips and her skills to the best of my ability, and all in all, I think I did a good job replicating her style. Of course, there are going to be things where I've not done as well as I could have. So, for example, I believe I could have done better on the hair. I feel like the hair is very much quite flat in terms of on top of the head, and that's the same with the irises, like the pupils. Um, because I feel like her eyes in general, her pupils aren't that big, and they're also smaller on the face, which is what looking at it, what I'm realizing. Her hair is also a lot more puffier and more voluptuous, whereas this seems a lot more flat. So if I were to change a few things, it would be maybe the design of the hair, um, and adding in some of those harder highlights as well, because I really did struggle with adding, going so far out of my comfort zone, just adding these blinding highlights. Um, and like I mentioned, the eyes, I think they need to be smaller, and I think they need to have more character in them and be more expressive. But otherwise, I think I've done really well on this piece and replicating her style. Um, Next is the landscape piece. So I also did, but yeah, I did a landscape piece, and I took inspiration from a few things. So this was like an animated video I found online that I really liked, like a scene of, and it reminded me of the photo on the far right, which is Lois's art piece. Now this isn't a one from her experience working in games. It's just sort of her own original piece, but it's still in her style and things. And obviously just a picture of a glacier, mountain, snowy mountain range, and things that had the same perspective on it. That I just wanted to mix and match. Obviously, I was mainly going for the style of Loish's digital painting over on the far right. But I wanted to mix in elements of these other two. Like, for example, I wanted to have swords in the ground, and I just like the idea of having like frozen swords in the ground. That's mainly where the inspiration for that one came from. And here, I wanted to have mountains, so I wanted to know sort of how to texture the mountains and the glaciers and things like that. So I began with mapping out a basic shape with the polygonal line tool and filling them in. There doesn't seem to be much line art in Loish's piece, so I didn't bother doing much line art. Um, she said she likes to incorporate sketches, but I don't think there is much sketching being done here. Like, I can't see any, so I do believe it's just colour build up and digital painting. So that's what I tried to do. I went in with the polygonal line tool and just filled stuff in so I could map out basic shapes. And then I began sculpting with colour. The clouds are heavily influenced by her piece, as you can see. That I did a great job in replicating those, and I was really proud. And I also created like glaciers by just layering up colours and to be honest, doing entirely random patterns in different colours, and it worked out really well. Obviously, there isn't any glaciers in Loish's piece, but I incorporated the clouds and, like, from what you'll see later, the moon and things. But I also used like Gaussian blur in the Gaussian blur pen in places in Procreate to make a sort of a perspective blur. This is the this. Oh, hold on. Okay, so I added some like swords and things in the ground, like I mentioned. I wanted to as inspiration. I added a moon up in the top left and some texture in the background, and I added some people, which is very similar to Loish's in that she has the people on the ice in the background playing around. So I really wanted to add some like silhouettes into this piece, so it would be more similar. So once I'd added swords and stuff onto my basic thing and some people, I basically mirrored the image and then sort of offset it and added a perspective blur, with a blue overlay layer, and then I sort of added like white sketchy lines on top of the layer, and it made the ice really well. So that's the ice that you see down there. But yeah, so I basically played with the levels with this one various times, but I actually preferred the unedited version, which was this version. Now, it's a lot brighter, and you can see that there's loads more fog, and the sky is brighter, and it's overall like a lighter piece. And I did this because I wanted it to be a lot more similar to this piece here, Loish's piece on the right, because I didn't feel, I thought it was too dark to be similar, if that makes sense. Like in Loish's pieces, it's very bright, it's very very airy, very just nice looking, and I feel like with the darker colours, it wasn't really giving off that vibe. So this is the finished piece, and as you can see, my work is very, very similar to Loish's in the way that it still has my original style mixed in there, even though I'm trying to recreate, her style. But it has some key elements from that piece and from her style. So I've got the way that she draws clouds, with the color build up and the smudging and things, and I have the huge like ice. I have the mist at the back of the ice and the white lines on the ice and the silhouettes of people, and that's what I took from that piece and from her work. And I even tried to draw them in the style that she would draw them, although I'm not really the best at that. But yeah, and then I added the glaciers, and I basically added some blur in places to give it a bit more of a foggy effect. So I think I did a pretty good job at replicating her style. I've pointed out the parts that make it similar, so I'm going to point out the parts that make it sort of stand out and almost feel like my piece rather than hers. So there's two glaring things really. The glaciers and the swords. Like, obviously, because I didn't have reference in terms of her artwork as to how she draws glaciers or swords. I tried to find some, but I couldn't really seem to find anything on how she draws them, so I kind of had to infer on how she'd draw them. So to be honest, I'm not sure if I did a great job on that. Obviously, they look like mountains, they look like swords, and the perspective on everything is good. But I just don't know if they're in her style specifically. I feel like they match with the piece. I feel like they mix in with her style really well, and the parts that I've replicated of her style, and I did try extremely hard to match them as well as I could. But I just think that those are the parts that maybe I could have done better on. Not that I don't like them and I don't think they match, and I don't, I really like the piece and how it turned out. But if I were to change anything, that's what I would work upon.